We are going to give the floor to Avram Friedman. A month or two ago, Melissa Murphy, who is the other organizer of this group, was at an event related to the ERA, and Avram was the speaker, and she was texting Avram's quotes to and saying, "Oh my gosh, you have to hear this guy!" So thankfully, she scheduled him for our May meeting, and we're really excited to hear from him. He is one of the founders and the current executive director of the Canary Coalition, which is a grassroots group focused on clean energy and clean air. He has a long and successful history of activism related to social and environmental causes, including the civil rights movement, anti-war movement, anti-nuclear movement, and under his leadership in 2004, the Canary Coalition won a Clean Air Excellence Award from the U.S. EPA. And in 2008, he was personally awarded the North Carolina Governor's Conservation Achievement Award for air quality activism. He lives in Dillsboro in a house he built himself. So we're very pleased to have you here tonight.
Beautiful introduction, and thank you for inviting me to be here. I feel privileged. And I hope that this presentation isn't just a presentation, but interaction with all of us. I'm sure some of you probably have things to teach me as well. The Canary Coalition started in 2000, and we were one of the groups that originated the Clean Smokestacks Act and successfully lobbied for the passage of that bill. And prior to that, I started a petition in 1986 when the Department of Energy decided that to put North Carolina, Western North Carolina, on a short list for the location of a high-level nuclear waste dump in Western North Carolina that would have gone on the border of Buncombe, Haywood, and Madison County in the Sandy Mush area. And that petition called for a referendum on a statewide referendum, and nobody had ever heard of a statewide referendum in North Carolina because this isn't an initiative state. We don't have a process for doing that. But we decided to do it anyway, passed a petition to do that. We got the ear of Liston B. Ramsey, who was the Speaker of the House at the time, and Bob Jordan, who was the Lieutenant Governor at the time, and they said, you know, that's a pretty good idea. And they put it on the ballot, and it passed by 93%. 93%, I should say, voted against the location of a high-level nuclear waste dump in North Carolina. Those experiences really empowered me to understand, you know, sometimes your words, always, your words have more power than you may realize. And very often we're hit with the message that you don't have power. And it seems overwhelming, you know, what can I do about climate change? God, that's such a huge issue, you know, what can I do about air pollution, you know, and the powers, you know, you're going up against powers like Duke Energy and the fossil fuel industry and the big banks, you know, oh, you're so powerless, it doesn't matter what I do. That's nonsense, that's nonsense. You have a lot of power, and when people work together, the sum is greater than the parts. You know, it's very powerful when people work together. So that's pretty much what this workshop is about, and I hope also that you won't hesitate to interrupt me and ask questions or put in your 2 cents during the course of this. But basically, what this focuses on is North Carolina state government lobbying, citizens lobbying, and the state legislature specifically. And you'll notice the motto that we've chosen to use, the power of the people is stronger than the people in power.
Let's hope so.
We have to remind ourselves of that constantly. Incidentally, in your lap, this handout is this PowerPoint presentation. And in some places, there are places for notes. If you feel like it's worth taking notes, don't hesitate to write on them. They're yours. Do as you wish. So I get asked this question a lot, you know, why lobby for a piece of legislation if you don't think that your effort stands a chance of succeeding given the current political atmosphere? Well, First of all, there are many reasons for introducing a piece of legislation, whether it passes or not. Lobbying for legislation is an educational process for legislators, media, the public, and for yourself. It's a building process, so you may introduce a piece of legislation, like Canary Coalition has introduced 2 pieces of legislation in this current legislative session, the Efficient and Affordable Energy Rates Bill and the We the People Act. And chances are neither of these bills will pass in this legislative session. We have about 15 legislators on each of these bills who have co-sponsored, which is a considerable number of legislators. So if it doesn't pass this time, in the next session, maybe we'll get 25, maybe we'll get 50. And if leadership changes in an election, we'll have a solid core of legislators that already know the subject matter, that are willing to advocate for it and build on the support that's already there. So just because your legislation doesn't stand a chance of, or appears not to stand a chance in this legislative session, that doesn't mean that it shouldn't be introduced. You have to start somewhere, and the longer you wait, the longer a process it's going to become. Start now if you feel it's that important enough to do that. So it gets beyond slogans to nitty-gritty policies and mechanics of how solutions will be implemented. You know, a lot of us have ideas about directions we'd like to see social movements go in, or environmental movements, or economic issues, what direction we'd like to see them go in. But thinking about the details is something that sometimes we don't do. If you sit down with a legislator and start to write a piece of legislation, you have to deal with the nitty-gritty of how it's going to get done, how's it going to get implemented, what actually has to happen, what old laws have to be changed, you know. And so you learn a lot in that process. You learn something about yourself, and you learn something about the issue that you're dealing with, and what are the obstacles, what are the things that are going to help it happen. And so that's an important part of this process as well. Lobbying basically promotes change, bringing new ideas into the realm of the public legislative discourse. And the one I skipped, it provides a vehicle for public involvement. That's a really important one. So, you know, I can go around shouting, we need to convert to renewable energy right now, you know. And so everybody in this room can agree with me, and everybody outside of this room can agree with me. So what? What do we do about it? How do we get there? Well, if you have a piece of legislation, HB 101, you can tell people, call your state legislator and tell them to vote for HB 101. It's something that people can do. It becomes a vehicle for that issue, for people to become involved in it. And so it's a really solid, tangible element in any campaign, is to have a piece of legislation you can point to that said, that's promoting what I want to do. So don't be discouraged by the current makeup of the General Assembly and think that it's worthless to go and lobby, because you have to understand that legislators will deal with hundreds of issues, you know, or more than 1,000 issues, bills that have been introduced. And most of the time, they don't even read those bills. Their legislative aides do, or they're just listening to their leadership who tells them what to vote for. But if you show up, or if 100 people write to them to support this piece of legislation, you put it on their radar, and they're going to learn something more about it. And you'd be surprised where you might find allies, sometimes where you don't think they are. You know, it's not always Democrats who will agree with you, and it's not always Republicans who will disagree with you. Even in today's North Carolina General Assembly, believe it or not, you know, we've found allies for the We the People Amendment and the Efficient and Affordable Energy Rates Bill in both parties. And I don't know if I explained what those two bills are. The We the People amendment that we're asking for is actually a federal, we're trying to amend the U.S. Constitution to firmly clarify that corporations are not people and money is not speech. You know, and that to us is a key environmental issue. It's also a key social issue and a key economic issue, because virtually every piece of progressive legislation out there is running into the same wall of corporate influence in our government. The fossil fuel industry, you know, Duke Energy certainly in North Carolina controls the North Carolina General Assembly because of the campaign contributions that they make to virtually every legislator in both parties. It's not just the Republicans that are influenced by them. So our democracy will not be ours again until we get the money out of politics, and that's what that bill is about. We want a ballot measure in North Carolina that will allow us to vote and tell Congress to pass this amendment to the Constitution. Incidentally, there is a federal piece of legislation. It's House Resolution 48 that's been introduced by 37 U.S. representatives, including 2 from North Carolina, 1 Republican and 1 Democrat. Walter Jones is the Republican, and Alma Adams is the Democrat, who are co-sponsors of that bill.
What's it called? House Resolution 49?
48.
And what does it say?
It calls for an amendment to the U.S. Constitution, 28th Amendment of the Constitution, clarifying that corporations are not people, money is not speech, overturning the Citizens United decision of the Supreme Court.
Thanks.
Is it something I could talk about on Thursday?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Oh, yes. Very important.
I mean, I think that encapsulates every single thing,
Absolutely. Yes.
except Russia.
Except Russia. Well, Russia's been donating to political campaigns also.
Could you please say the name of that bill again?
HR 48.
It's HJR 48 is the federal legislation. Now, the state legislation, which is what we're concerned with, we want to put North Carolina's voice into this. 18 states have already asked for this constitutional amendment. We want North Carolina to be the 19th state, and we want to do it through a ballot measure where the people vote on it. And that's House Bill 453 and Senate Bill 354. We got it introduced in both the House and the Senate in North Carolina.
354 SB.
House Bill 453, Senate Bill 354. And here's a great quote, one of my favorite quotes from Martin Luther King Jr. "We are not thermometers here to measure the temperature. We are thermostats here to change the temperature." This was, King ran up against people within his own campaign and during the civil rights era who were discouraging that, oh, we can't introduce a voting rights bill now, it'll never pass, you know. And this is what he said. He said, we're not here to measure the temperature. So this is a very interesting quote from Article 1, Section 2 of the North Carolina State Constitution, that all political power is vested in and derived from the people. All government of right originates from the people, is founded upon their will only, and is instituted solely for the good of the whole. Isn't that an amazingly powerful statement? That's Article 1, Section 2. That's like the top priority of the basis of the state constitution of North Carolina. Every time you see a state legislator, you have to quote this to him or her because they forget this. And we forget it too. But don't feel intimidated because they work for you, and it's our will that counts, not theirs. And that's going to be a theme throughout this presentation. So this is Let me see if I can get that in a little bit better focus. Maybe not. But you have this again on your lap. This is a map of the state government, North Carolina state government, separated into the legislative branch, the executive branch, and the judicial branch. And I don't have a lot of time. Usually this is a 2-hour presentation that I'm condensing into like 45 minutes here, so I'm just going to run through it. But I urge you to look at this. It's very interesting. There are some changes that have taken place, or that the legislative branch is attempting to usurp some of the power of the executive branch right now by taking some of these branches out of the executive branch and putting them under the jurisdiction of the legislative branch. The one that stands out immediately is the Board of Elections, you know, which has traditionally been the party of the governor controls essentially two out of 3 members of every Board of Elections in the state, every local Board of Elections in the state. And so the legislature wants to change that now and put that under whoever is dominating the legislative branch gets to control the Board of Elections. But I believe that is now in court, and I think probably the governor will win that case. Let's hope he does. Because, you see, you can't gerrymander the governor's race. The governor is chosen by all the people of the state, and so you have a sense of where the majority lies, whereas in the legislative branch, it ain't necessarily so. And this is a map of the leadership in the House and the Senate, basic hierarchy that exists. I would amend this just a little bit because and I got this off the General Assembly's webpage. Somewhere in there should be the committee chair people, because those people really should go right under like the majority leader in the House and the President pro tempore in the Senate. The committee chairs have a lot of power. They can basically table a bill and nobody else has anything to say about it. I mean, there are ways, parliamentary maneuvers, to overcome that, but only at the risk of one's political career. So basically, a committee chairman says whether a bill lives or dies, as does the Speaker of the House and the President pro tempore. And the Lieutenant Governor is no longer has any power in the Senate. Although at one time the Lieutenant Governor in some ways was more powerful than the governor in this state, but the Constitution was amended to change that in the 1990s. There was a constitutional amendment that we all voted on at that time that gave the governor veto power. This was one of the few states in the country where the governor didn't have veto power until 1996, I believe. And at that time, the lieutenant governor was demoted and the president pro tempore became the president of the Senate, in actuality, if not in name. And the president pro tempore and the speaker have an enormous amount of power because they can, well, we'll go into that, but when the first thing that happens when you introduce a bill is it goes to either the speaker or the president pro tempore, and they decide what committee to send that to. And if they don't like a bill, they'll send it to the Rules Committee or some committee that has nothing to do with the subject matter where it's going to die. You know? And likewise, if the speaker or the president pro tempore wants a bill to pass, it will in general pass. These are the standing committees in the House. I'm not going to go through them now. And these are standing committees in the Senate. And this is the basic path that legislation follows. It goes, so if you want to introduce a bill as a citizen, you have to find a sponsor. You know, Susan Fisher has often been our sponsor for a bill. But there are a group of very progressive legislators in North Carolina. Most of them, almost all of them are Democrats. There are a few Republicans who will listen sometimes. But so you have to find somebody who's willing to sponsor that legislation. Then the bill actually goes to the drafting committee. There's a team of attorneys that turns your language into legalese, into bill form, and they number every line. So then it comes back to the sponsor, and if it's a friendly legislator, they'll allow you to be part of this process and actually make sure that the drafting team didn't change the substance of the bill so that it's not what you wanted it to represent. And sometimes it'll go back and forth between drafting and the sponsor and the legislator. And then from there, once you're satisfied with the language, they file the bill and it goes to the floor of the House or the Senate, where the Speaker or the President pro tempore assigns it to a committee, or assigns it to a series of committees, which is not uncommon, 2 or 3 committees. First, it's got to go through Public Utilities, then it's got to go to Judiciary, then it's got to go to Appropriations. And once it passes through that sausage factory, hopefully resembling what you wanted it to resemble, assuming it doesn't get tabled in any one of those committees, which often happens as well, then it goes to the floor of the House or the Senate, where it is debated and again amended, and there it either dies or it passes. Now this happens separately in each chamber, in the House and the Senate, and very often, almost always, the language of the one in the House and the one in the Senate are different, and they have to be reconciled. So the bill goes to a joint committee, which is a permanent joint committee for that session. In other words, that handles all of the legislation that comes through both houses and in that session. And then the joint committee comes to an agreement, hammers out the differences, and then it has to go back to each chamber where it gets voted on again and amended again, and then it'll go back to the joint committee to reconcile those changes. And this can happen back and forth, back and forth, and back and forth until both houses come up with the same bill with the same exact language, every period, every comma, every question mark. And when they both pass that bill, then it goes to the governor's desk, where he either signs it or tables it or vetoes it. If he signs it, it's a law. And if he doesn't, then it gets sent back, and then that process continues. So it's not a simple process.
What does it mean when it says it gets tabled? What exactly does?
That means he just doesn't act on it.
Okay, so it just sits there.
It just sits there, which amounts to a veto,
Right.
because it needs his signature to become law. However, if he does that, or if he vetoes it, his veto can be overridden by 2/3 vote in each house.
Doesn't it though, if you just table it, not go back though? Like, if it's not officially vetoed, wouldn't it stay?
It stays on his desk, but they can override. There's a certain time period
Okay.
that goes by. If he doesn't sign it, they can override that tabling veto, and it becomes law anyway. Any questions about this before I go on?
It's amazing that anything
Really?
Pardon?
It's amazing anything gets through.
Yeah.
And gets to be a bill.
Except for those crazy special sessions where they
Yeah.
like pass
Two in the morning.
like 2 in the morning.
Well, you see, what can happen, if there's a bill that the leadership wants to get passed, then the President Pro Tem and the House Speaker, if they agree, will get together and say, this is what we want, this is the language, and then they put pressure on their members to just railroad it through
Yeah.
the process.
And they don't, well, I don't know that
I don't understand it all, but it seems like what I read about it is they don't allow the other members to see it until the last minute, and they don't give them enough time to read it, and all of a sudden, then, because they have a supermajority, there's a vote, and it's gone.
Legislators rarely read legislation.
Okay. They wouldn't have read it anyway.
Right, usually it's either their aides that do, or they're just following their leadership. They
Okay.
tell them to vote for it, and they vote for
Is that why, when you said that like the speaker and the president pro tempore have,
it. Speak a little louder, please.
is that, when you said that like the speaker has, a lot of power over it, is that why? Because they're advising, are they the person that would be advising their?
That's one reason, and the other reason is they have the power to send it to a committee where it dies. I mean, they can kill a piece of legislation, or they can make it happen, and it's rarely any other way.
Right.
And right now, are both the speaker and the pro tem Democrats, or one Democrat, one Republican? How's that?
They're Republicans.
Oh,
The Republicans choose all the committee chair. The party in power, the party with the majority, even if it's just a one-vote majority, gets to choose all the chairman of the committee, and the speaker, and the president pro tempore, and all the leadership under them. That's the way it is.
and if, let's say, that were to flip, the partisanship were to flip, then the party in power gets to redo all that?
That's right.
Okay.
That's right.
Might be helpful to say how many members are Republicans and how many are Democrats. And
Well, right now, the Republicans have a veto-proof majority in both houses. That means they can override any veto by the Democratic government. They have enough to do that. Even though they only won, if you add up all the votes, the legislative votes, it was very close. It was like 52-48 or something like that. People, those who voted for Democratic candidates and those who voted for Republican candidates. But because of gerrymandering, it's totally lopsided.
73.
Yeah. So this next slide is about legislative deadlines. And these are deadlines, I want to emphasize how undemocratic a state we live in. It is a very undemocratic state. We have what's known as a part-time state legislature, which may have made sense when North Carolina was a small rural state, but now as a big industrial, large population state, it doesn't make any sense at all. But so the legislature is in session. Every legislator, the entire General Assembly, every senator, every legislator has to go through re-election every 2 years. The entire General Assembly, every 2 years. So they're always running for election. Okay. Within that 2-year term, there is a long session of the General Assembly and a short session. 1 year is the long session, the next year is the short session. And within each of those sessions, they set up these deadlines. So by this year, you can see with the deadline, you have to introduce, a bill has to be drafting by, let's go to the last one, April 6th, and filed in the House by April 25th. And then let's see, the crossover deadline is April 27th. Crossover deadline means if it hasn't passed in one house or the other by April 27th, the bill is considered dead for the session. So that means there's a window of opportunity between March or April 6th and April 27th, wherein legislation can be drafted, introduced, and passed in one house. And it has to go through that entire legislative process that we talked about in that period of time. Now, if you're a citizen who has to take a day off from work, oh, one more thing, just to emphasize this. The legislature is only in session on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday of every week that they're in session. They come in Monday night from their home, and they go home Thursday night, and to their constituent, territory, and then they come back on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday the next week. So there's 3 days every week during this part-time state legislature, which is only, the long session is from January generally until about July. Short session is even shorter. It's from like March until June. And that can get extended, and it does get extended, but not for the purposes of these deadlines. These deadlines stay there. So if you're a citizen that wants to get something, you got to take a day off from work, you got to make an appointment to go speak with how many legislators you can, and then you have to get all of this done somehow in time for the deadline of April 27th. So it's virtually impossible for a citizen by himself or herself to do that, and it's not even easy. It's very difficult for a group of citizens to do that. Now, if you're Duke Energy and you have a team of permanent lobbyists that live in Raleigh and sleep on the floor of General Assembly and know all the legislators, you get anything you want passed because you have a lot of influence, right? And that's what I mean when I say that this is an extremely undemocratic state in that sense. It does not match Article 1, Section 2 at all, this process. There's nothing about this is by only the will of the people. So what I do is ignore this. That's their deadline, it's not my deadline. When I walk into there, it doesn't matter what day it is, I go in there and I say, and I tell them that's not my deadline. I'm not worried about that deadline. We're here to tell you what the people want, what we want. And that's how you have to approach them. Politely. You don't want to, the idea isn't to go in and antagonize the legislators, but at the same time, you have to make it clear that they work for us.
Avram, how many people are introducing bills at any given time? I mean, the same people over and over, you know what I mean?
Well, certainly the same entities over and over again. Duke Energy, the fossil fuel industry, the banking industry, pharmaceutical industries. The paid corporate lobbyists,
right.
Those are the ones that get things done at will, basically, through this process. But there are also environmental lobbyists. There's the NAACP, and the American Civil Liberties Union. I mean, there are good guys out there lobbying, and sometimes we win, and sometimes we get things done. But it's usually not in one legislative session. It's usually over a period of time, and after many negotiations and building until finally the right circumstances occur that make it happen. But it can happen, and sometimes it happens very fast. Like with that nuclear referendum bill, that happened very, very quickly. I mean, that happened almost overnight. In fact, that happened during a special session of the General Assembly. That wasn't called for that purpose, but we kind of hijacked it for that purpose. Okay. So I want to go over a little bit about navigating the website of the General Assembly, which is a wonderful, powerful resource. So it's ncleg.net is the home page of the North Carolina General Assembly.
Could you say that again, please?
ncleg.net. And this is the home page of the General Assembly, or a picture of it. And so just what I did was I followed this line of thinking. What I was doing, let's pretend we're looking for a legislator to sponsor a piece of environmental legislation, which is something we frequently do. And we're looking for a Republican legislator to do, because it's easy to find Democrats relatively, but to get something passed, you need Republican support. They're the leadership, they have all the power right now. So we're looking for a Republican legislator. So we go into the House, which you can't see very well, I'm afraid, but on this upper blue line up here, that says House. Okay, so, and next to it is the Senate. You can go to the Senate, and so we're going to go into the House, and there's Tim Moore. He's the Speaker of the House, and what we're looking for is, now I should point out at the top of the page, you see that lined graph on the top of the page? That's the bill lookup. You can look up, if you know the number of a bill, you can look it up there, or if you know keywords attached to that bill, you can look it up. And you can look it up for any year. It doesn't have to be in this session. It's very proud. And then you can see the text of the bill, you can see who sponsored it and co-sponsored it, etc. But what we're going to do now is we're going to go into the line. It's all the way on the left where it says House member list. Under that it says room, phone, and email. And we're going to go into there, and so this lists every House member, their room number in the state legislature, their phone number, and their email address. Now, I'm going to go down to Nelson Dollar, and I chose his name just because I love that name for a legislator.
Oh, yeah.
And there he is. That's a picture of Representative Nelson Dollar. Okay. Now, look just above his picture. There's a line of choices, of options. One is his biography. So you want to find out a little bit about him, you can go into his biography. Bills that were introduced bills is the next tab. And then votes. You can actually look at his voting record. Committees, the committees that he's on, and House info. I'm not exactly sure what House info means, but so let's go into introduced bills, just to get an idea of where this guy is at, okay? And on the next, here it is, and this lists all the bills this session that he has introduced, that he's been a sponsor of. And if you go down, you're going to notice there's a bill about 2/3 or 3/4 of the way down that says H-172 fracking, protecting the public. Now, of course, that doesn't really mean anything, right? Because we live in an Orwellian age in which that could be the exact opposite of what it said. But nonetheless, that's an area of interest. Okay, this guy, he sponsored a bill called Fracking, Protecting the Public. So if you press on that link, you come up to House Bill 172, and let's see, it lists all the co-sponsors of that bill. And who are some of those? Okay, the primary sponsors were at the top, Pendleton, Malone, and Dollar. Okay, but underneath that is the co-sponsors, Adcock, Ager. Oh, John Ager's on there. He's a good guy, right? He's a progressive Democrat from Buncombe County. Baskerville, Brockman, Bryan, Cleveland, Cothams, Cunningham, Faircloth, Fisher. Susan Fisher's on there. Floyd, Fraley, Glazier, another very progressive representative. And if you keep reading, you'll see a list of several very progressive legislators. Verla Insco's on there. So that might give you an indication. This is probably a pretty good bill. Otherwise, you know, people like Susan Fisher and John Ager would not have co-sponsored it. So there's probably, now you'd have to look at the text of this bill to see exactly what it said, you know, and in some cases it might be, maybe, you know, because of the nature of this issue, you know, in which fracking used to be banned in North Carolina, and then they went 180 degrees in the other way and they removed all public protections. This might put some of the protections back in that existed beforehand, you know. So it may not be a great bill, but it might be, it's something that maybe the fossil fuel industry wouldn't be happy about, you know. And so it gives you an idea. This guy, he's willing to stand up to the fossil fuel industry in some cases, to some degree.
Can Can you get?
So it gives you an idea of who he is.
From the website like this, can you get what the bill actually says?
Yes.
Or do you have to do the lookup at the?
Yes, on this page, if you look in the upper left-hand corner of that box, it says filed HTML.
Okay.
If you press on that link, it will take you to the text of the bill.
Are these bills written in language that a layperson can understand, or are they in legalese and they're not sort of interpreted for the general public?
I guess it depends on your degree of knowledge, but it's
What about
usually
if it's
not too difficult to understand.
Okay.
And usually there's a heading on the bill which summarizes it in English. and then it goes into the details of the actual legislation, which is somewhat more difficult to understand.
I've seen ones like, I don't know, that are maybe directed towards social or are really like simple things that are pretty easy to understand, but others that especially have like financial and tax considerations that are like past my ability to understand. So I imagine it probably also has to do with just what you know about, even if it's not legislative, like understanding like, you know, inner workings of a medical profession or things about taxes or something like.
Yeah, I mean, it varies from bill to bill. You know, some of them are easy to understand than others. There are a lot of legislation sometimes is changing aspects of past legislation, and so there'll be a lot of references to past legislation, numbers, you know, and obscure references that really is difficult to understand. But in general, I mean, if you read through the text of the legislation, you'll get the gist. If you're an intelligent person, I mean, you know, it's not that difficult to understand. I mean, a bill can be 1 page long, or it can be 200 pages long. You know, so it really just depends on the nature of the bill you're talking about and the subject matter. You know, I don't have a better answer than that.
If you find this person that seems friendly to your cause, and if they don't live in your, they're not your representative.
Good question, yeah. You can still go to them. Yeah. But I will add to that it is more powerful if you are a constituent of that person. So it's a good idea to find allies who are constituents of the legislator that you're targeting. You know, now there are most of the progressive legislators in our current General Assembly are receptive to you whether you come from their district or not. But if you're trying to find a Republican who, you know, is pro-solar energy, it's more powerful if you can bring to them a petition of 300 people in their district, you know, anything that you can show how it relates to them politically, how it would benefit them to support. And we're going to get into that right now. What does it take to get a bill through the legislative process? So I'm using a metaphor here of electricity. And if you know anything about electricity, it's amps times volts equals watts, and watts is a measurement of power. Okay, and that power is what it takes to get it through the circuit of the legislature. And so amps is what I'm comparing reason, the reason for passing a legislation, you know, whether it's an economic benefit, environmental, public health, moral or ethical reason, constitutional reason, human rights, any data, documentation, studies that you can show. That's what the amps are, the reason for passing this legislation. But no matter how good your reason is, how much data you have, how much proof, it's not going to go anywhere unless you add the volts to it, which is public support. And so you have to demonstrate that there is public support through petitions, sign-on letters, local government resolutions. That's a really powerful one, you know, going. And because if you get the Asheville City Council and Buncombe County Commissioners to say that they support something, they're speaking for many thousands of people. And they were willing to put their political necks out there and make this statement. So that's a very powerful one that we use very often. Letters to the editor are good. That helps to educate a lot of people. And newspaper editorials. Go to editorial boards and ask them, do you believe in this process? You know, like we're doing that right now with the We the People resolution. We're going to various editorial boards and asking them for editorial support. Do you believe in this and in overturning the Citizens United decision? Well, tell the public, because we've got this bill that really needs to get passed and it needs your support. And they'll do it sometimes. Sometimes they won't, but you try. All you can do is try. It doesn't hurt to ask. People going and speak, you'd be surprised, you know, like I said, there's hundreds of pieces of legislation that go through the state legislature in any given session, and 95% of them, legislators don't hear a peep out of anybody. People don't even know about it and don't express their support or opposition to them. It's just something that's an inside game that's happening, you know. If all of a sudden they get 100 postcards about one particular issue, their little radar screen goes up. And oh, this means something to a lot of people, because they know that if they're hearing from 100 people, there are probably many thousands of people out there that are also concerned about this issue. And if you can get 1,000 people to write letters or call in or go, or you know, if you can get a dozen people to go and talk to them, that it really means something. It carries a lot of weight.
So, back to the question of whether it's your representative or not. I mean, a lot of times people say, you know, contact Berger, contact Moore, the speaker.
Right.
But do they care if they get 100 postcards from Buncombe County?
Of course they care.
They do care.
Yeah.
Even though we're not voting for them.
Well,
Because usually our
if it's only
legislators are
Buncombe.
on our side as far as the issues we
Right.
care about. So I'm just wondering what kind of advocacy does make a difference for us.
right. Not as much as if you were a constituent of theirs. But again, if they hear from people, you know, that's different than the ordinary thing. And oh yeah, don't just send in 100 signatures from Buncombe County or 100. Yeah, it's important to reach out and contact people who are their constituents. But also, you know, when you talk about the Speaker of the House and the President Pro Tem, they're a special case because they, in essence, are representing the entire state. They're in a position where their constituents are more than just their local, you know, where they were elected.
So they should hear from us.
Oh, they should absolutely hear from you,
But if you
yeah.
have co-sponsors of the bill and you connect the dots and you say, okay, this is my representative who has co-sponsored your bill and this is my voice against your bill, then that should carry weight. Connect the dots for them.
That's right.
Especially if it's a statewide
Right.
legislation or bill.
So emails, phone calls, visits, and if you can afford to, if you can raise money for it, paid publicity, TV ads, radio, newspaper ads. Money counts too. And what's it, you know, I truly believe that people, when they get to a political movement that becomes obvious and high profile, will always overpower money. Always. If you look at the history of the United States of America, you know, in which women got the right to vote, when there wasn't a single legislator in Congress who was a woman. How did that happen? How did that happen?
Evil time.
The abolitionist movement ended slavery in this country. The slaves didn't have anybody representing them in the House or in the Senate. You know, the labor movement, they were passing laws to prevent organizing, you know, labor unions. weapons. They were beating people over the heads with clubs. They were shooting people. And it was the money of corporate interests that were behind those nightsticks and guns. You know. But when people got together, it didn't happen overnight, and stuck together and maintained a sustained movement, it won. It won. And when you think about those historical events, in some ways what we're facing today is a pittance to that. You know, we tend to think, oh, how can we, oh, this is the worst it's ever, no, it's not. This is not the worst it's ever been. We have much more political power today than the people did back then, and women did before they had the right to vote. So, amps times volts equals wires. That's how you get a bill through the state legislature. So, yeah, if you want to go down and talk to your state legislature, call or make an appointment. Now, just because you've called and made an appointment doesn't mean you're going to go to meet you're not going to get to meet your legislator. 2 out of 3 times you won't ever get to meet your state legislature. Or at least you won't get to a sustained meeting where you can express everything you want to express. Because even though their assistant made an appointment with you, they're going to get a committee meeting that wasn't scheduled, or something is going to happen that they just won't be able to meet with you. But it's important to make that appointment anyway, because you've put yourself and your issue on their radar. And you might get to see them, you know. And this is why they call us lobbyists. What we do is, even though we were supposed to meet them in their room at a certain time and place, and they got called to a committee meeting, instead what you're going to do is you're going to wait outside that committee room in the lobby and wait for them to come out and ask if you can walk with them when they go to lunch, or if you can have lunch with them. And very often they'll say, yes, that's fine. And then you get to talk to them. And typically if I'll go to Raleigh, I'll make about 15 or 20 appointments. And I may get to actually speak to 2 or 3 legislators for the appointment that I made. But I will get to make contact with their legislative aides. It'll make an impact anyway. You leave literature in their office. And it's good not to go alone. Like if 4 or 5 of you go together, then their legislative assistant is going to say, well, 5 people came to see you know, about this issue. That has an impact. Dress well. You don't want the issue to be about how you dress, you know, or how you look. You want the issue to be about the issue at hand. You know, in the wintertime, I generally grow a beard and have long hair. But that's not what's the most important thing to me when I go to speak to state legislators. I shave and I cut my hair, and I put a jacket on and a tie if I have to. And you make the best impression. You want to, like I said, you don't want it to be about your dress. You want it to be about the issue. And adopt an attitude of respect and personal integrity. Don't be intimidated, and don't be hostile. It's a balancing act. And it's a hard one, you know, because sometimes they're going to say things that are just going to make you angry. How could this person be so stupid, you know? But you can't say that. You have to just feed them information. Know your subject. Prepare written materials and packets for legislators. And usually I do that. I take a folder, and just like the voltage amperage chart, you know, in the left-hand side of the folder I put my reasons, any data I have, laws in other states that have passed that are similar to the one I want to get passed now, and in the right-hand side, all my displays of public support, petition signatures in their district, newspaper editorials that have been written, resolutions that have passed in local governments in support of the legislation. have those two things to show them. And ideally, you want, like, if every question you get asked by the legislator, you want to have a piece of paper to support what you're telling him or her. You want to look well prepared. You want to impress them with your knowledge. And you want to impress them with the amount of public support and the reasons for passing this legislation. And I'm going to close with this story about Gandhi. It's said that when Gandhi met with British occupying officials, he always addressed him as my dear friend. He never approached as an adversary with hostility, but rather with a smile, and maintained that bearing through his conversation. Yet somehow, by the time Gandhi departed, the official was made to understand that he was among a small group of armed men surrounded by a sea of millions, and it was only by the grace of Indian people that he was safe from harm. That's what you're shooting for.
Wow.
I wanted to ask, do you have any thoughts, experience with online petitions? Because they keep coming.
Yeah, and in fact, the We the People petition can be signed online at ncwethepeople.org. Please write that down, and please do go and sign that petition. And you can also print out paper petitions. To my shame, I didn't bring any this evening.
Can you repeat that website?
ncwethepeople.org.
And they take donations too.
There's also, that bill was sent to the Rules Committee in both the House and the Senate. And there is a button you can push, one single button that will send a message to all members of the Rules Committee in both houses with a message that you send. So please do that as well at ncwethepeople.org.
Are you willing to address the possible special elections with redistricting? Do you know anything about?
I don't know what's going to come of that. I don't think any decision has been made whether there is going to be a special election in 2017 or they're just going to put it off until 2018.
Right.
And which districts.
There are 28 of them.
But I don't think, well, this one might be.
I don't know.
I don't know. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So it could be that they're going to elect the entire whole General Assembly or just the districts that are involved.
Were the most egregious.
Yeah. Does anybody else know any more about that?
I just passed out the papers that you had here, and it does look like there's a petition behind here. I don't know if that's...
That's not the right petition.
Okay.
But
Okay.
I'll take your names anyway.
It's over here.
Does anybody have one last question? Well, thank you so much, Avram.
Thank you.